They didn't throw me out. That's what hurts the most. They smiled. They hugged me. They said things like, "Mom, it's only temporary, and you know you're always welcome." But somehow, after my fourth son got married, I stopped having a place that was actually mine. One month, I was sleeping in my oldest son's guest room, tiptoeing around his wife's morning routine like I was a hotel guest who overstayed checkout. The next month, I was at another son's house, folding my clothes into smaller and smaller piles so I wouldn't take up too much space. Nobody ever said, "You can't stay." They just kept saying, "Not right now." I became the mother who rotated, the mother who packed light, the mother who learned which cupboards not to open, and the strangest part? I raised these boys alone, 4 sons, fed them, clothed them, worked double shifts, skipped meals, skipped sleep. Yet somehow, I was the one who didn't quite fit anymore. They thought I didn't notice what was happening. They thought I was grateful just to be included. But I was watching, listening, learning, and one quiet decision I made changed everything, without raising my voice even once. So let me tell you how it actually happened. I'm telling this story now from the calm side of it, from the place where the ache has settled into something softer, something clearer. But back then I was just tired. I raised 4 sons in a small 2-bedroom house in the Midwest, nothing fancy. Beige siding, a porch that creaked when you stepped on the 3rd board, and a kitchen table that always felt 1 chair too small. Their father left when the youngest was barely walking. No dramatic goodbye, just a quiet disappearance and a stack of unpaid bills that showed up like clockwork. I didn't have time to fall apart. There were lunches to pack, permission slips to sign, shoes to buy that somehow never lasted more than 6 months. I worked nights for years, cleaned offices after hours, answered phones during the day, learned how to stretch a dollar so thin it could almost float. And I was proud of my boys. People used to stop me in the grocery store and say, "You've got good sons." Polite, helpful, respectful. I made sure of that. I taught them to open doors, to say "Yes, ma'am," to stand up when an older woman entered the room. What I didn't teach them, because I didn't know I had to, was what happens to a mother when she stops being needed. When the first one got married, I cried happy tears. When the second one married, I started downsizing closets. By the third, I told myself it was temporary discomfort. By the fourth, I realized no one had actually asked me what I wanted. After my youngest son's wedding, the house went quiet in a way I wasn't prepared for. Not peaceful, just empty. I sold it 6 months later. Everyone agreed it was the smart thing to do. "You don't need all that space anymore, Mom. Come stay with us for a while." For a while? That phrase followed me like a soft warning. At first, I rotated naturally. Thanksgiving at one house, Christmas at another. A few weeks here, a few weeks there. I told myself it was bonding time. But slowly, little things began to shift. The guest room started doubling as an office. My suitcase stopped getting unpacked all the way. My favorite mug stayed in my bag instead of the cupboard. I learned schedules that weren't mine, dinner times, TV preferences, when not to talk. I started asking permission to exist in spaces I once created. And the hardest part? They still called me Mom, still hugged me goodbye, still told people how strong I was. But strength, I was learning, can become an excuse for neglect. And I was about to learn exactly where I stood, without anyone ever saying it out loud. There are rules no one explains to you when you become the guest in your own children's lives. They don't sit you down. They don't hand you a list. You just start noticing, and if you're smart, you adapt. At my second son's house, the rule was noise, not loud noise, just presence. I learned not to wake up before everyone else. The coffee grinder was too loud. The hallway floor creaked near the guest room, so I memorized which boards to step over, like a child sneaking out past bedtime. At my third son's place, the rule was opinions. I was welcome to listen, to nod, to agree, but not to suggest. If I mentioned how I used to season chicken, His wife smiled politely and said, "Oh, we're trying something different." Different wasn't the problem. Dismissed was. And at my oldest son's house, the one everyone assumed would be my anchor, the rule was time. "We love having you, Mom," he'd say, but it always came with a calendar attached. A weekend, 2 weeks, a month at most. Never open-ended, I became very good at being small. I folded laundry quietly, washed dishes immediately, made sure my phone calls happened behind closed doors. I started wearing softer colors too. Nothing too bold, nothing that announced I was there. The wives weren't cruel. That's important to say. They were polite, efficient, busy. And that's what made it harder. Cruelty can be confronted. Politeness just smiles and keeps moving. I noticed how conversations changed when I entered a room. Not dramatically, just a subtle shift, like a radio lowering its volume. They'd talk about weekend plans, trips, renovations, plans I wasn't part of. Sometimes I'd overhear things I wasn't meant to. "She's just here for now. It's only temporary. She understands." That last one hurt the most. Because I did understand. I understood that they were building their own families now. I understood space was tight. I understood priorities shift. What I didn't understand, at first, was why understanding always flowed in one direction. I started timing my stays myself, leaving before the tension peaked. I'd say things like, "I don't want to be in the way. You kids need your space." They'd respond with relief disguised as reassurance. "You're never in the way, Mom." But they never asked me to stay longer. And slowly, something inside me began to change. Not anger, not bitterness, awareness. I started watching how decisions were made. A wife would mention something casually. "We're thinking of turning the guest room into a nursery." And suddenly my suitcase felt heavier. A son would say, "We'll figure something out later." And later never arrived. I realized something important during one quiet evening, sitting on a borrowed bed, staring at a ceiling that wasn't mine. I was being passed around because I made it easy. I was flexible, grateful, low maintenance. I had trained them well to rely on my patience. So I stopped filling the silence with reassurance. I stopped saying whatever works for you. Stopped apologizing for taking up space. Not outwardly, not dramatically, just internally. I began asking myself questions I hadn't allowed before. What did I want my mornings to feel like? What kind of quiet did I need? What did rest look like at this stage of my life? And most importantly, what happens if I stop being endlessly available? The answer didn't come all at once. It came in pieces. A look exchanged between a son and his wife. A delayed response to a text. A suggestion that I might be more comfortable somewhere else. That's when I understood the truth. They didn't want to say out loud. They loved me, but they didn't plan around me. And love without planning has an expiration date. By the time I packed my suitcase for the next move, I wasn't sad anymore. I was calm. Because for the first time, I wasn't thinking about where I was going next. I was thinking about where I would finally stop. There's a moment in every long season of endurance when you don't break. You simply decide. For me, it happened on a Tuesday morning. Nothing dramatic, no argument, no raised voices. I was at my youngest son's house, sitting at the small kitchen table while his wife packed lunches for the kids. She moved quickly, efficiently, barely looking up. The radio hummed low in the background. I reached for the cabinet where the coffee mugs were kept. She paused, just for half a second. Then she smiled and said, "Oh, those are for everyday use. Yours is in the guest room." She didn't mean anything by it. I know that. But something about "yours is in the guest room" landed differently. Not angry, not humiliating. Final. I poured my coffee into the mug from my suitcase instead. And in that quiet sip, I realized I had been explaining myself for years. Explaining why I was early, why I stayed up late, why I needed a certain chair, why I preferred the window cracked at night, explaining why I existed. That morning, my son came in, kissed his wife on the cheek, nodded at me. "Mom," he said, glancing at the calendar on the fridge, "we'll figure out the next couple weeks soon." I nodded back. But I didn't say what I usually said. I didn't say take your time. I didn't say whatever works. I just said, okay. That was it. One word. No softness added to cushion it. And something shifted. Not in them, in me. I finished my coffee, washed the mug, dried it carefully, and placed it back into my bag. Then I went to the guest room and sat on the edge of the bed. I didn't cry. I started planning, not loudly, not publicly. I made a list on my phone, just for me, monthly income. What I actually needed, not what I'd convinced myself was enough. Places I'd lived near once and loved. I thought about mornings without tiptoeing, about cooking without checking someone else's schedule, about having a chair that stayed mine. When my son came home that evening, he asked what I was thinking about. "Oh," I said lightly, "just organizing some things." And that was true. Over the next few weeks, I became quieter, not withdrawn, just observant. I noticed how often my sons assumed I would adjust. "Mom doesn't mind. She's easygoing. She'll tell us if there's a problem." They weren't wrong. I would tell them. Just not yet. I started leaving houses earlier than expected. Not in a huff. Not with an excuse. Just, I've got some things to take care of. They looked surprised. Concerned even. Because inconvenience had never come from me before. I spent a few nights in a modest motel off the highway. Nothing fancy. But it was quiet. No one needed anything from me. I slept deeply for the first time in months. In the mornings, I sat by the window with my coffee and felt something unfamiliar. Peace. That's when I understood my power had never been in confrontation. It was in absence, not disappearance, not punishment, just not filling every gap they left open. I began looking at small apartments. Nothing I could afford outright, but something that could become mine. I didn't tell my sons yet. I wanted the decision to belong to me first. And when I finally did tell them, it wouldn't be framed as a problem, it would be framed as a fact. Because facts don't invite debate. And for the first time since my last son got married, I felt something steady beneath my feet. I wasn't being passed around anymore. I was choosing. I didn't announce my decision the way people expect big changes to be announced. No family meeting. No serious tone. No dramatic pause. I mentioned it the way you mention a change in weather. We were finishing dinner at my second son's house. Plates stacked. The TV murmuring in the background. His wife was scrolling on her phone, half listening. "I'm thinking of getting my own place," I said, reaching for my cardigan. Silence didn't fall. It hesitated. My son looked up first. "Oh, like later on?" "Soon," I said. His wife smiled quickly. "That's exciting," she said. "Independence is good." But then came the questions. Not curious ones. Protective ones. "You sure that's smart at your age? Rent is expensive right now. Wouldn't it make more sense to stay with family?" Family. That word had weight now. I noticed how the tone shifted, not towards support, but assessment. As if my life choices required approval. I kept my voice even. "I've done the numbers." My oldest son called the next day, not to argue, to worry. "Mom, I just don't want you stressing yourself out. Why rush? You know you always have a place with us." A place, not a home. I thanked him, meant it. But I didn't soften the decision. And that's when something interesting happened. They began checking in more often. Texts. Calls. Offers to help me figure things out. attention I hadn't received when I was quietly adapting. Concern, I realized, often shows up when control feels threatened. Not maliciously, instinctively. They weren't afraid for me. They were afraid of losing access. Because once I had my own place, my movements wouldn't be predictable anymore. I wouldn't arrive with a suitcase. I wouldn't ask how long I could stay. I wouldn't be scheduled. I found a small apartment on the edge of town. 1 bedroom, big windows, a kitchen just large enough to move comfortably in without bumping into someone else's routine. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. When I signed the lease, my hands shook, not from fear, from relief. I told the boys afterward. Reactions came in layers. Pride, concern, suggestions disguised as advice. Maybe we should help furnish it, so it feels right. Don't get anything heavy. We might need to move you again someday. Again, I smiled and said, I've got it covered. And I did. I furnished slowly. Deliberately. A chair by the window. A lamp I liked, even though it wasn't trendy. Plates I didn't have to justify. I didn't invite them over right away. Not as punishment. As protection. I needed the space to become real before opinions entered it. The first night I slept there, the quiet felt loud. No footsteps. No murmured conversations behind walls. Just me. And I cried. Not because I was lonely, because I had almost forgotten what privacy felt like. The calls continued. Are you eating okay? Do you feel safe? Do you miss having people around? I answered honestly. Yes, yes, and sometimes. But I didn't say, come get me, because I wasn't waiting to be retrieved. Weeks passed. Then something subtle shifted again. Invitations started coming, but different ones. Come over for dinner. Stay the night if you want. No pressure. No timelines attached. No assumptions. I noticed something else too. They started asking when I was free, not telling me. As if independence had recalibrated the dynamic. I accepted some invitations, declined others, calmly, without explanation. And in that space between yes and no, a new version of our relationship began forming. One where I was not being passed around. One where I was being invited. On my terms. The first invitation came from my oldest son. He called on a Sunday afternoon, the kind of call that used to mean someone needed something. This time, his voice was lighter. Mom, we're doing a small dinner Friday. No big thing, just thought I'd ask. Ask. That word landed softly. I checked my calendar, empty except for a note I'd written to myself. Read, rest, nothing else. I can come for dinner, I said, but I'll head back home afterward. There was a pause. Oh, he said, you don't want to stay? I like my mornings at home, I replied. Not defensively, not apologetically, just truth. Friday evening, I drove myself. No suitcase in the trunk, no overnight bag, just my purse and my coat. When I walked in, the house felt familiar, but different. I wasn't scanning for where my things would go. I wasn't calculating how long I'd be there. I was visiting. His wife hugged me and said, "It's good to see you. You look rested." I smiled. I was. Dinner was easy. Conversation flowed without effort. I noticed how my son watched me, as if trying to understand this quieter confidence. After dessert, I stood up. Well, I said I should head out. They both looked surprised. Already? I hugged them, thanked them, and left while the evening still felt warm. In the car, I realized something important. Leaving first doesn't mean leaving angry. It means leaving whole. The next invitations followed the same pattern. I arrived when I said I would, left when I was ready, no explanations. And slowly, the tone changed. They stopped managing my presence. stopped worrying about logistics, because I had taken responsibility for myself. One afternoon, my youngest son stopped by my apartment. He looked around quietly. The chair by the window, the neatly arranged shelves, the calm. "This feels like you," he said. I nodded. He hesitated before adding, "I didn't realize how hard it must have been before." I didn't correct him. Understanding doesn't need to be forced. It grows best when given space. Over time, the invitations became genuine, not out of duty, not out of guilt, out of respect. And I learned something I wish someone had told me years ago. You don't earn respect by being endlessly accommodating. You earn it by showing people how to treat you without telling them. I was still their mother, still present, still loving, but no longer portable. And that made all the difference. Time has a way of smoothing sharp realizations into something gentler. By the time my apartment truly felt lived in, books with dog-eared pages, a plant I managed not to kill, a rhythm to my days, the boys had adjusted, not all at once. Individually. The oldest noticed first. He started asking my opinion again, not out of habit, but consideration. "Mom, what do you think?" Not, "This is what we're doing." The second son began timing his calls differently. No more quick check-ins between errands. He'd say, "Do you have time to talk?" "Time. Mine." The younger two showed it in smaller ways. One asked if I wanted a key to his house. Not so I could stay, but so I wouldn't feel like a visitor when I came by. Another asked me to recommend a book. Not about parenting, not about cooking, about life. That's when I knew something had shifted. They weren't managing me anymore. They were relating to me. One evening, we all ended up in the same room for the first time in a long while. No holidays, no obligation, just dinner. At my place. It wasn't planned as a statement. I simply invited them. "I'll cook," I said, "and you can leave whenever you want." They laughed. But they noticed. They sat at my table, a little unsure at first. The chairs were sturdy, the lighting soft. No one was stepping around someone else's schedule. After dinner, my oldest son stayed behind to help with the dishes. We stood side by side at the sink. "I didn't realize," he said quietly, "how much we leaned on you to make things easy." I didn't answer right away, not because I was hurt, because I was choosing what to do with the truth. "You did what you thought was normal," I said finally. He nodded. "But I'm glad you stopped letting us." That was enough. No apology needed. No rewriting the past. Just acknowledgement. As the night ended, they all left one by one. Not because they had to, because they chose to. And when the door closed behind the last one, the apartment didn't feel empty. It felt complete. I sat in my chair by the window and watched the lights from passing cars. I thought about the woman I was when this began. The one who believed love meant flexibility without limits. The one who thought patience was the same as peace. I hadn't withdrawn from my family. I had stepped into myself. And in doing so, I gave them something better than endless availability. I gave them a mother who stood still. And that, it turns out, was what they needed all along. People still ask me sometimes if I get lonely. It's usually said gently. The way you ask someone if they're managing. I tell them the truth. I get quiet. And there's a difference. Loneliness feels like being forgotten. Quiet feels like being finally heard. By yourself. My days have a rhythm now. I wake up without rushing. I make coffee in the mug I like, the one that never has to be stored away. I sit by the window and watch the neighborhood wake up. Sometimes my sons call. Sometimes they don't. And that's okay. Because when they do call, it's not to figure out logistics. It's to share something. A frustration. A small win. A question they don't ask anyone else. They visit too. Not often, not rarely, naturally. They bring food. They leave dishes undone sometimes. I let them. Because this is my space. When they leave, they hug me longer now. Not out of guilt, out of understanding. I've learned something important in this season of my life. You can love people deeply without making yourself portable. You can be generous without being consumed. And you don't have to disappear to be missed. You just have to stop rearranging yourself. I think about the years I spent rotating. Suitcases half-packed. Mugs kept separate. Mornings borrowed. I don't regret them. They taught me who I was when no one was watching. But I don't live there anymore. Now, when my sons talk about the future, they include me without assuming. They ask. They wait. And sometimes I say yes. Sometimes I don't. Both answers are respected. This is what peace looks like for me. Not loud, not triumphant, just steady. A chair that stays by the window. A door that opens when I choose. A home that doesn't move, because I no longer do. And if there's one thing I know for sure now, it's this. A mother doesn't stop being a mother when she steps back. She simply teaches her children how to meet her where she stands.